Alan, always good to check in with you because it's really hard to find someone who's done economic thinking who is supportive of the president's action on trade. Why are you?
Sarah, I'd have to say that it's because the conventional wisdom on U.S. economic relations with China, going back to the early 1990s when this current phase of tremendous trade and also investment expansion with China began, the conventional wisdom on how this would turn out has been completely wrong. In fact, it couldn't have been wronger. The expectation was that China would become freer, would become more cooperative economically, would become easier to deal with regarding national security considerations. Exactly the opposite has happened on almost every front, to the point where this country now is faced with the rise of a rival, the likes of which it probably hasn't seen before in its history, and a rival whose rise has been largely enabled by the American corporate sector, encouraged by previous American administrations.
So, Tony, is the president and the Treasury right to go after technology investments from China in this country?
Well, look, I think every country is interested in looking at American technology. It's not just the Chinese. And of course, the Chinese are taking special attention to it, but every country is, and including a lot of countries that are very close allies of ours. I think the transformation in China, but some of it good and some of it bad over the past 25 years has been pretty clear. But I think there are some companies in China that are trying to do the right thing when they invest in the United States. Certainly shutting off that spigot will have enormous consequences for American firms and in particular American technology firms. We are shrinking the pool of potential investors in American companies. I think back to about 11 years ago, we approved the Lenovo transaction of IBM's ThinkPad business, which has gone really, really well for everybody involved, for the United States, for Lenovo, for the investors, for the workers, for people who are interested in having great laptops to buy. That transaction has zero chance of getting done today, and certainly within this environment, and no one would even try to finance that transaction to try it, given what's coming with some of the new directives.
Alan, if I'm understanding you in a phrase, you think China is A, unrepentant, and B, unchangeable, and therefore we ought to face reality, just realize that they are going to be our generational rivals, and we ought to disengage. Am I getting you right?
That's exactly right. And in this respect, I would very seriously fault President Trump for not remotely adequately explaining to the American people the stakes involved in his various China trade policies. I would applaud him for these steps that are apparently being contemplated to further restrict Chinese investments in the American technology sector. There's also legislation, by the way, that's been sponsored by Senator Rubio that would restrict U.S. corporate transfers of technology and capital to the Chinese technology sector. I would wish that his China economic policies have been focused more on steps like this, which would achieve the very important goal of strategically disengaging this country from a Chinese economy and from a Chinese system.
What would be your marketing campaign, Alan? I mean, if you were put in charge of the Trump administration marketing campaign for Chinese tariffs, what would you say? How would you sell that to the American people?
We need to stop feeding the beast.
And so, Tony, this sounds like Alan is ready to. Alan seems ready to declare economic Cold War.
Well, this is we
are in fact in a trade and tariff war with China and the rest of the world.
We've been in a trade and tariff war with China for 30 years now, except we haven't been engaged in it.
Yeah, we've actually done well in it, though.
Have we?
I mean, the belief that we have failed in our competition with China
is
just flat out wrong.
Is that why President Trump won election?
Look, let's be clear. If you are an American firm that has to compete globally against other firms that are competing globally, and you want to shut them off from China as a market and as a source for components, then you're putting an anchor around American firms' ability to compete globally.
You are completely ignoring the fact that about 40% of the immense American manufacturing sector that's left produces components and industrial inputs of all kinds. So there would be tremendous opportunities opened up.
That's all we've done is continue to grow. We are still,
it's more than $1 trillion.
after all of this,
you guys, you're talking at the same time. Sorry,
economy.
guys, I can't understand either of you. Okay. So Tony, why don't you go ahead first, and then Alan, you can respond.
I would just say the myth of the hollowing out of American manufacturing is just it is exactly what politicians have tried to sell voters, and why voters have come to lose faith in it. Not because we have failed to be, we're not a industrial powerhouse, and in fact, an exporting manufacturing powerhouse. We continue to be, even in the face of a rising China and other rising countries in East Asia. It's a miracle how well we've done.
Hey, Alan,
Tony,
even if your points, even just add this, even if your points are valid and there's reason for the U.S. to move to block intellectual property theft and a number of other unfair trade practices, I think the problem is we live in such a globally interconnected world at this point that what you're going to see are unintended consequences, like Harley-Davidson moving production to Europe to avoid getting hit with tariffs and be able to have a market in Europe, or Airbus getting the next contract out of China instead of Boeing.
And yet, Sarah, well, first of all, let's look at that Harley-Davidson story real fast, because as I heard this morning on CNBC, because I'm a real fan, Harley-Davidson said that it would take between 9 and 12 months to relocate some production, and that tells me that big companies, big manufacturers like Harley-Davidson have become very adept at responding quite effectively and quite efficiently when various foreign governments raise trade barriers. And they have been doing this for 25 and 30 years in response to trade barriers erected by much smaller, much weaker economies than the United States. And they're going to adjust. They're good at this. That's how they make money largely.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.